Guys, I feel like I cannot stop talking about the Leica 10-25. I've made multiple videos about it up to this point, and most of them have been overwhelmingly positive, but I know there's some people out there that are not super keen on this lens, and there's also some people that might be about to buy it, not sure if they should go with like this or the Sigma 18-35 or something else. And so today I just really quickly wanted to run through everything wrong with the Leica 10-25, which basically means everything that kind of annoys me slightly, because for the most part, it's great. I mean, I love this lens, but I think I can admit that it's not perfect. Really, no lens is, in my opinion. Anyway, I wrote a whole list down. I wanted to challenge myself to really bring to light some of the nitpicks and slight annoyances with this lens. So let's get right into it. So we got the phone, we got the list, and the first one I have already made a video on, but this is probably the biggest single problem, and that is it breaking. You know, some of these early on copies had this real tendency for the back of the lens to become detached, and that is a no-go on a lens this expensive that you really are going to want to rely on, because this thing was out of commission for a long time, and having sold my 12-35 f2.8, I really had none of that standard focal length covered for a good while. I managed through somehow, but yeah. Having a lens break on you like this is going to be a huge bummer. Okay, this one probably seems obvious, but yeah, it's big. It's a big lens. It extends when you zoom it. It's not actually that heavy, but still, if you've got a smaller gimbal that's not rated for heavier camera rigs, or even if it can handle that weight, it's pretty front heavy. I'm pretty sure my Weebill Lab could have handled this amount of weight, but the lens just sat so far forward in regards to my other lenses that I actually just couldn't move the camera back far enough in the cage. So if you thought you could balance this on your gimbal and size is a premium, obviously this lens is not going to be the way to go. But I use it on my Weebill Lab S now, and it works just fine. More on the size, it's not just that it's big and heavy and the gimbal stuff, but if you're using a tripod, it actually extends past the body of the GH5 on the bottom just a little bit when the lens extends. So that means certain tripods are going to have some issues with this lens. And also, if you lay down on the table a lot or use tripods a lot, you can kind of scratch up the zoom ring a little bit because it wears on it. I mean, you certainly can get a tripod plate that's a little bit on the small or medium size, but if you're trying to balance your tripod and you've got a bigger plate, then you're going to run into a couple issues with this thing unless you have a cage or maybe you run the battery grip or something like that. More on build quality, I am slightly annoyed that the ring for the zoom and the ring for the focus are the same texture. At least they're different sizes slightly. But when you're just feeling around for them, they feel exactly the same, which is going to be maybe a non-issue most of the time, but it just is one of those things. Hey guys, if you like the video so far and you like this idea and you like the channel, it really would help a lot of you guys subscribed. I would really appreciate it. It is not truly parfocal. I mean, no real modern lenses are, especially, or at least on the Micro Four Thirds system. They all are what I like to call effectively parfocal, which means they have the appearance of being parfocal, but how they actually achieve it is not optically by design. It's actually just the lens sort of focusing really quickly. So let's see if we can demonstrate it here. So as you can see, as I zoom in, I stay in focus, assuming I was in focus before. And as I zoom out, it stays in focus. But the way this actually achieves it is it's just, you know, rapidly shifting focus, because if you did this quickly, especially if you did this in a slow motion mode, you know, like 120 frames or higher, you could really see this lens not being able to catch up in those really high frame rate situations. So yes, it's parfocal, but it's not truly parfocal. And there especially is a problem when you're zooming at, you know, all the way to the wide angle and then shifting the manual focus clutch focus ring, where your focus can shift because the minimum focus on the 10mm end is different than the minimum focus at the 25mm end. So you could run into some weird problems there. All right, so we're gonna zoom into 25 minimum focus, zoom out to 10, and then the second you touch it, you can see it moves, even on this little thing here. So then you can refocus it, obviously. So if you focus it normally, zoom in, you know, oh, it changed then too. It's not something that's gonna come up too often, but yeah, like I said, if you're focused at 10 millimeters and focused into the minimum and then zoom in to that same subject, your focus is gonna be off, obviously, but there's also some weird jumping where you might focus all the way to minimum focus at 25 millimeters, zoom out, and then right when you touch the focus ring, it sort of jumps back to where the focus should have been. So I don't know, it's just kind of a weird quirk. I think I value the macro ability of the 10 millimeter end of things more than I do the few occasions where this has been sort of tripping me up, but still would be nice if we could have the good macro and have a more elegant solution to that. And I really do think that is really mostly only when you have that clutch engaged, so probably won't come up too often. The next one is something that Olympus has apparently figured out and Panasonic is still working on, but that is the fact that the manual focus on this lens has those stops, but as you've probably heard them referred to, they're not really hard stops, they're more like soft stops. So you'll hear it click, but if you turn it again, it just keeps going, which is kind of weird, and I would definitely prefer it to just be a complete hard stop and not be able to rotate anymore. I think that's just as the nature of the lens. I think the Sigma 18-35 is the same way, along with a bunch of other lenses, but I tend to prefer the lenses where once I hit that stop, I can't turn it any further because it just prevents confusion and a lot of other things like that. And it's just a little nicer feeling. What can I say? Another issue I have with the clutch is that while it is super nice, don't get me wrong, I really like it, and it is so close to being just as good, maybe even slightly better than the Olympus lenses for reasons I won't get into right now. But the fact that it's only about a 90-degree rotation, that's usually good enough, but I've been in a few situations where a little bit more precision would have been nice. You know, maybe not 300 degrees or even 180 degrees, but just, you know, something between like 120 degrees would have really been super useful. But that 90 degrees, gets, you could just about get away with it with a like 20 to 50 millimeter full frame equivalent. If they made a full-size telephoto version of this lens, I think that focus clutch throw would have to be a lot longer, maybe going up towards close to 180 degrees. And that is actually a perfect segue into another topic, which I also have another video on, and that is the fact that this lens has, I'm gonna keep saying it, no big brother. This is the only lens that Olympus, Leica, Sigma, anybody makes that doesn't have a telephoto lens counterpart to it. It's just a lens in the class of its own. It's kind of like Canon's 28-70 f2. It's like great, but what do I pair up with this lens to make it a set? And so, yes, it is nice that this lens exists, and other Leica lenses like the 50-200 or the 42.5 prime do match it, but the fact that you can't build this kit out from this by itself is pretty much the biggest downside to me, other than the fact that it kind of sometimes breaks. Panasonic, I'm gonna keep mentioning this in my videos until you make the lens. Push back the GH6 one more year and make this lens instead. Okay, no, wait. Okay, I better not say that. People are gonna get really mad at me for that one. Back from our diversion to the theoretical land of telephoto lenses, we're talking about this lens, and back to that focus clutch. I get why it does this, but it really annoys me that micro four thirds lenses in general can focus past infinity, and this lens is no exception. Even with the manual focus clutch enabled, you can just go that little bit past infinity, which is really annoying. And for certain situations, it can be really difficult to tell if you are in focus to infinity. And yeah, it's a bummer. If the fly-by-wire went past infinity, great. But I really wish the clutch mode would have just stopped right there at infinity. That would have been super useful. This one is interesting, and that is the inconsistent flare. So I really do appreciate this on one hand, because at 10 millimeters, this thing barely flares at all. But once you start zooming in, even to like 12, 14, 18 millimeters, you're getting some really strong green, big green circles in like the opposite corner of the flare, because I've got the Pro Mist on. So let's take the Pro Mist off. See if we can't do a live demonstration here of this flare. So you can see the flare is super minimal at 10 millimeters, but right as you zoom in, this ring right here, it's gonna be worse with like a sun or something. gets really, really pronounced and really focused in at the 25mm range. And you get these little bursts when the lights are just out of frame, which can kind of kill your contrast. And so, do I care about this stuff? No, but and again, if you could rely on this flare to be one way or another, that would be one thing. But the fact that at 25mm and then about halfway through the range and then at 10mm, you know, has completely different flare performances, which from, you know, again, I like flare, using it as a creative tool, but the fact that when you zoom, you can't really predict if the flare is going to be mild or really strong is, I don't know, that could just rub some people the wrong way. And, you know, it's just something that I wanted to bring to you guys' attention because, again, I wish it kind of went one way or the other. I wish it was just, we don't care about flare or we're going to completely eliminate flare. So again, this is another nitpick. In general, the flare performance is pretty good, but there's just a couple focal lengths in there that, you know, really produce some big green jellyfish blobs. And so it's something to keep an eye on. It's not something to obsess over, but it is just another nitpick that I was wanting to note. So obviously at, you know, a 20mm f3.4 full frame equivalent, you're not expecting to get the most blurry backgrounds out of a lens like this, but you definitely can get them. I would be cautious though. At 10mm, you sort of get what I would describe as like a pinched bokeh effect, you know, where it's not like a circle, it's not like a cat's eye, which is pretty common at like the 25mm focal range area on this lens, but at the 10mm, 12mm area, when things are just slightly out of focus, they can look pretty busy and the edges could get this sort of like pinched, you know, like triangle shape that's like pointing in. That could be a cool look, and I don't exactly hate it, but it is far from the world's most smooth bokeh ever, so just another one of those little things that you might really care about or you might not care about at all. On a related topic to bokeh, this lens has pretty great flare element coverings for a lot of the different focal lengths, not all like we talked about. The fact is that those coatings can sometimes be intrusive on the bokeh of an image. So for example, the Voigtlanders have a really, really clean bokeh in the center with no onion ringing and texture in them. But if you zoom in on this Leica and get some really nice bokeh shots, you can see the sort of, I don't know how to describe it other than a texture in the bokeh, which can be a little bit distracting. I think this thing has really great bokeh for a zoom lens especially, or just in general, but those little problems like at the wide angle lens and those onion rings when you're zoomed in with like highlight Christmas lights in the back or whatever, it can start to add up, those little tiny things. Speaking of things that are super minor and you probably won't care about at all, is this lens has been reported to have some field curvature where certain parts of the image around the edges are on a different focal plane than the ones in the middle, and so that could lead to some softer corners that don't really have a solution other than stopping down quite a bit. When I look at my photos, even shot at the highest resolution on the GH5, I really haven't been able to see it, but okay, quick thing I'll say on this subject, I might have got to the end of this thing, and that is maybe it has something to do with the in-camera corrections. Here, take a look at this. This is an uncorrected JPEG straight out of the camera. You can see it looks pretty good for a wide-angle 20mm lens in terms of distortion, but if you take it to a third-party program, you can turn those corrections off and see the true story, which is quite a bit more of that wide-angle barrel distortion you see. Obviously, I think this being corrected in camera is an overall benefit, but how far those edges are being stretched and how dark those corners can be, I know it's not the best lighting, could be the explanation for why the edges can sometimes seem a little softer than the middle at the wide angles. Maybe, maybe not. I am not scientific enough to know, but anyway, back to the rest of the video. Okay, so this might be the most niche one yet, but I wish this thing had a little bit more character, honestly. The Sigma 18-35 is pretty neutral as well, but even that has a little bit more character than this. I like the characteristics, but in terms of like a vintage flare or really cool things, I don't know. It just isn't the most inspiring lens ever. It is on my camera like 90% of the time for my corporate work, but would I ever take this onto like a short film or something like that? Probably not. There also is the huge problem of the fact that a giant segment of the micro four thirds lens users, like the older cameras, GH5S, Blackmagic 4K, things like that, that don't have IBIS. It's going to be a lot more of an ask to use this lens because it's got no image stabilization in the lens. Now, I don't care because I got the GH5, but unless you've got like the G85, the GH5, or the G9, or one of the Olympus bodies, then it's gonna be kind of hard to justify. Would image stabilization have been nice? Yes, but it is what it is. And really the only other downside to this is its insane price. I mean, I think the price is pretty much equivalent to a bunch of primes that you would get for this system, and I think the functionality of this way outperforms the primes of, you know, Sigma, Olympus, Panasonic. In fact, I made a whole video about that. Check it out in one of these corners. But really at the end of the day, it's a huge ask to get this lens over the Sigma 18-35, which is, even with a speed booster, even with an expensive speed booster, still cheaper than this lens. So yeah, maybe I'll make a video on this, which one you should go with and why. At the end of the day, they are very similar, and which one you go with is gonna be just up to how you shoot and what you value. But the fact that a basically identical counterpart is out there for that much cheaper, that is almost as good, it is so close to being like a neck and neck tie with one lens doing something better than the other lens, that it's kind of hard to justify this except for a few key features that are really, really handy. So anyway, there it is. Every negative thing I could think of when it comes to the Leica 10-25. I think I got everything. There might be a couple more things that others would complain about, but in general, there you go. That's the most negative I can be about this lens. That's everything I can think of. And so if you were about to buy this, I wouldn't say let this steer you clear, but definitely take very carefully into consideration every single one of these points I made in terms of the negative. I'd also recommend you go on over to my channel and check out my multiple positive videos, because I think the positives still do outweigh the negatives and that really high price tag this lens asks. So let me know if you guys are gonna go with this, go with the Sigma, and if this helped you out today, or you learned something, or at least you found it entertaining, then definitely hit the like button, comment, subscribe, all that stuff that everyone asks you to do. It really does help a lot, just every little interaction you do, every comment you leave, and even just watching this video. So, you know, honestly, that has been enough just by itself. I appreciate you guys stopping by, watching this video. Like I said, check out some of the other Leica videos, and if you did subscribe, I will see you in the next video. Every video really is just an excuse to talk about the 10-25 and its theoretical big brother, isn't it? If you guys have any more ideas on more videos I could make about this thing, let me know. There's the Sigma one. Not it versus the Sigma, but which one should you buy? What are the biggest make or break factors? That one's not bad. Still gonna make that autofocus video too. So much to do. All right.